Okay, so I can start a little bit about the overview, basically some of the general stuff, and then when Lan joins us, hopefully he'll get in here, and then we can start talking more about some of the guts of it. So I wanted to go over what we're going to be doing in the class. So basically, it'll just introduction to the overview, how we're using the overview, some different ways that we can use it and leverage it for some of the different functions that we're doing at Eve, some of the ways that we're going to set it up, looking at how we'll set it up. I'll go into pretty detailed view of the overview settings and some of the different options that we can set and how those are leveraged in the eUni standard overview. I'll talk about saving and sharing an overview. I will go over the eUni standard overview as well as look at some of the potential of the overview that is laid out in some of the other standard ones, like Sarah's is a very popular overview that people use. I actually used Sarah's before I started using the eUni one. And then keeping your overview current. So for instance, when they added the circadian seekers, we had to add those to the overview to make sure that they'd show up. And then using the overview with DScan. This is very useful, particularly if you're doing scouting. And then we can talk a little bit about some manual setup and configuration if anybody has any questions or wants to go over some of that stuff, and then some Q&A as well. So trying to get Lan in here. Okay, so just to kind of know where we're at, how many people are in eUni? I guess let's just do this. If you've already configured your overview, go ahead and type an X in lecture.eUni. Okay, good. Awesome. And are you guys all using the eUni standard overview setup? Awesome. Okay, great. So there are some things in there that I've fine-tuned myself. One of the things that doesn't show up, for instance, is drones very well. So I wanted to add drones because every time I went out on a fleet, I noticed that all my buddies in fleet were picking up other people's drones and I couldn't see them out there. So it's one of the things I added. There's a few tweaks that you can do, and just getting a better sense of some of the overview settings helps make those tweaks a little easier. So I guess the question is, if you're going to do this in space, it's fairly straightforward. If you're going to do it in a station, what we'll do is I want to make sure that everybody has their existing overview saved, and so that they're not, if we do any tweaks or do any changes in the overview now, that you won't end up editing anything and causing problems for yourself. So the first thing that I would recommend everybody do is if you're actually, let me just go ahead and X up if you're in station and hit a Y if you're in space. All right, everyone's living dangerously. Nice. Okay. Well, that makes things pretty easy. So I will tell you this, since Lan is in station, and just for everyone else's use, the way you get into, and I don't know if this will work, let me try it. The way you get into your overview settings when you're in a station is by typing this. Obviously without the period at the beginning of it, but if you just type /open overview settings, it'll get you into your overview settings when you're in a station. The only problem with that is it's only going to have the last preset that you had selected in the last tab that you had selected. So there's not really any way to work with your existing presets and save a new preset, or you can save a new preset, but you can't edit an existing preset unless you know the name of it and already know all the settings in it and are tweaking it from scratch. So if you're in space, and I'm in space as well, hopefully you guys are all cloaked and hidden somewhere where nobody can find you, or at least sitting at a safe. Everybody knows what a safe is? Anyone not know what a safe is? Dead space. That would be really safe. So hopefully everyone's sitting at a nice safe. In an NPC corp, that makes it even easier. That's pretty safe too. So great. So if you click the lines, the 4 lines, the hamburger menu at the top of the overview, you can go scroll down to Open Overview Settings. And there's a bunch of settings tabs in there, Overview tabs, Tab Presets, Appearance, Column, Ships. Go to Miscellaneous or MISC. And down at the bottom of that, there is a button called Export Overview Settings. And let's go ahead and export one. And what I would recommend is check the Check All box at the very top. And then down at the very bottom where it says File Name, let's just name it something really obvious like Before Class. And then hit Export. And that way it'll save it as a YAML file. And we will have saved our presets so that if we muck around with anything during the class, we can always load our existing presets and we won't have edited anything that we didn't want to edit. Rand, if you are in Station, it will only allow you to work from your existing preset, but you can always save it as a new name. So if you make any changes, you can always save it as a different name than your existing preset. So you don't actually really ever have to overwrite anything. The only difference about being in Station is it doesn't let you change your preset. So you're always starting from whatever the last preset you had selected in Space was. So that's why one of the advantages of being in Space is you can change your presets. So we can actually look at what some of the different presets are. So go ahead and once everybody's got that saved, let's go ahead and you can close that Open Overview Settings window and let's just look at the overview generally and go ahead and open it nice and large and just to give a sense of what's going on. So typically when people have their overview open during a fleet, they're going to have it pretty large anyway. You want to see enough ships vertically, but you also want to see all the columns horizontally as well. So having it stretched pretty far across your screen is going to be beneficial for you, particularly because if you're using the eUni setup, the last 2 columns are Alliance and Corporation, and so it helps you get a sense of who you're shooting at or who you're looking at in space, particularly if we have war targets or just to know who we're dealing with. So for instance, down at the LSC, we have some pretty common interactions with some different groups like Overload Everything or Sayusin or Field Theory. And these guys are ones that we know pretty well and we know what they're going to bring to a fight. And so if we're not ready for something that they're going to bring, we may not want to engage one of their guys. So having those open having those tabs or those columns visible in the overview is beneficial to knowing what we're going to get into if we're going to start some sort of fight with somebody. So just really generally, the overview class really talks about having what windows you want open during your normal operations, and it recommends having your local window open as well. One of the advantages of having the local window is you can always see who's in space with you. This is not the case in Wormhole. Wormhole space is the only space where it doesn't show you exactly who's in space with you. The only way Wormholes show you who's in local is if somebody talks. So as long as you don't say anything in local, in Wormhole, nobody will know you're there. However, everywhere else, and which is one of the reasons why people say that if you're doing exploration and you're doing nullsec sites, doing nullsec sites in null is safer than doing nullsec sites in Wormhole because you can see who's in the system with you. So having local open is really convenient for that, and obviously not part of the overview class, but just one recommendation for local is if you click anybody's name in local, and I like to have local open, and I like to go into the settings for the little 3 people and select show member list and make sure that it's the show compact member list, and I'll select one of the members' names and I'll hit Control A. And the advantage of that is now everyone's selected, everyone's highlighted. I know exactly who's in there with me. If somebody new comes in, they won't be highlighted, so they won't have the white background, and I'll be able to see them really easily. So just a convenient way to kind of notice when somebody else pops in system. And I just did that myself, and a war target just popped in system, all nice and flashy and red. Fortunately, I'm cloaked, so he won't be able to find me. So I'm not going to get into some of the other things the class goes into about watch list. Watch list is great, particularly if you're a Logi, you're going to need to know your watch list. You'll have your drones window open in space. I want to get into the guts of the overview settings. So let's go ahead and any questions so far? Okay, good. Okay, let's go back into the hamburger menu at the top left corner of the overview menu and go ahead and open overview settings. And let's go all the way over to the, and again, if you're docked, then type /open overview settings, and that'll get that window open for you. Okay, so let's go to the overview tab, and at the far left. And so the only thing about the overview that one of the real limitations of the overview is you can only have a maximum of 5 tabs ever. That's it, period. So you can change the presets on those tabs. So you can change which tabs actually show what they show, but you can only ever have 5 tabs. And so one of the reasons the eUni has set up its overview the way it has is it kind of leaves this one tab for PvP, which is always going to show, typically you would only ever load the presets for PvP and PvP drones in there. Travel tab will show the different stargates that you can go through, as well as any enemies that might show up. And there's also there's a PV travel that's no neut, so it doesn't show neutrals. So that it can limit things that show up on your scan to, or on your overview, to just things that are flashy to you. And then there's a situational tab, and the situational tab can be loaded up with whatever you happen to be doing. I think the default that's in there is missions, but there's also a mining option. People will also select looting. I've created a new one for looting with drones. And sometimes people will, I think there's in the eUni overview setup, there's one for wormhole too. And the wormhole tab is a little bit different. I'll be talking about that later when we get into using the overview settings for DScan. The fourth one is fleet, and there's a couple different options there. Fleetmates there, and then I've actually added another one for fleetmates with drones. And obviously, the more drones you have showing up on your overview, things can get really hairy pretty quickly. You'll end up with a bajillion things on there. But sometimes it's beneficial to have that stuff on there, particularly if you're looking to scoop up some drones that a fellow fleet member got shot during combat. They left their drones floating out there. You want to scoop them up to bring them home, particularly if they're geckos. They're something that's really expensive. And then the last tab should probably almost always and ever be pod saver, and you should probably never change that. And hopefully everybody's had the opportunity to use it, but if you haven't, then the convenience of pod saver and always knowing that pod saver tab has always got some sort of celestial setting on it means that you can get your butt out of trouble if you get shot. If your ship dies, you can just quickly click on the pod saver tab, immediately click on anything in there, and click warp out and just start spamming. So the idea of pod saver is literally click on anything in there and start spamming the warp button to try to get your pod out of trouble. Now, in the eUni overview setup, the star, the sun, is actually selected in pod saver, and I don't recommend that because that's where a lot of people go when they're in trouble. So when people are bouncing out of combat, they'll warp to the sun because it's one of the easiest and most obvious celestials, and it's actually a celestial that pops up on a lot of the different overview escapes. And it also shows up in your PvP travel, it shows up in your PvP, so that's one that people go to often. And it's happened to me where I've been really low in hull, warped out to the sun. There were a bunch of enemies already sitting there because they were all low and they got warped out too, and they shot me. So I'll talk about how to get rid of that too. So there are a few options within the overview tabs. You can create a name for your tab. You can select which preset you want it to default to, and then you can select which bracket you want it to show. And now brackets are what shows up in space. So brackets don't have anything to do with the overview per se. They have to do with the little white icons that show up in space and the hover that happens when you hover your mouse over anything that's in space. One thing about the tab name that's relevant is the tab name supports a few HTML tags. And I'll actually type one in there for you. I don't think that the eUni overview currently does this, but I'll type this into Lecture eUni. If you put in the HTML tag, for instance, this, Oops. 75. Bold. If you put in that type of tag, where you set the color and then you set bold, you can actually change the colors of the text that's in your tab names. It just makes it a little bit easier to see and easier to click on, a little more obvious. A lot of people will do the pod saver as green, the fleet as purple because your fleet members are purple anyway, PvP as red, and so on. So that happens to be the color I'm using for my PvP tab, which is red. It's kind of reddish. It's actually kind of a pinky red. Maybe you don't want to use that one. So if we go over to the tab presets, we can start getting into the guts of this here. So in overview settings, the second tab over is tab presets. And tab presets is where you set the different types of things that you want to see on your overview. And right underneath tab presets, it'll say preset and selected overview tab. And underneath that is the preset that's currently selected. So right now I have PvP travel selected, but whatever tab you had selected and whatever preset was currently loaded is going to show on that tab or in that area right there. And actually, the way you select a preset is to right-click on any tab. So you can actually do that now. If you open your overview and right-click on the tab, you can say Load Preset to Tab. It actually lets you load to bracket there as well, and you can actually load some of the defaults. So if you end up restoring your overview to default, you can load them. If you end up using something that's not default, but you want to get access to the defaults quickly, you can load a default to the tab as well. You can delete the tab. I don't know why you'd ever do that, but and also you can make changes on the fly. So anytime you see something in the overview, if you want to remove it from the overview, you can right-click it right in the overview and say remove whatever from overview, and it'll remove it. Likewise, if you see something floating around in space, you can right-click on it in space and say add to overview, and it will add that to your overview. And after you do that, up in the top, right next to where it says overview, it'll show you the name of the current preset, and it'll say not saved. And then what you can do is you can actually go into the overview settings, and when you show up at the tab presets, it will actually say the name of the tab dash not saved, and you can save it right here. And when you save it, you can either save it with the existing name and overwrite your existing preset, or you can save it with a new name and it will give it a new preset. So in this tab presets tab, there are two different tabs. There's types and states, and types and states work very intimately together. And this actually causes a lot of problems for folks because it seems like it's obvious that it's going to give you one thing, but then because these two tabs work together, it kind of makes it a little bit problematic. So in the types tab is just a list of all the different things that could possibly show up in space. The first section is asteroids. That's pretty self-explanatory. Celestial is going to be all the large celestial objects, planets, moons, wormholes, etc. Also, this contains a very important few things. If you open up the celestials, you'll notice it has something called biomass. Now, biomass is corpses. And not too many people have biomass turned on in their tab presets, and therefore they don't see corpses. So a lot of times, for instance, in nullsec, or even in lowsec, although more rarely in lowsec, people will scatter corpses around at a gate, and the idea is that somebody who's cloaked will get close enough to it within 2000K, because then it will uncloak them. They won't have seen it. It won't show up in a bracket, so they won't see it in space highlighted white, and it won't show up on their overview because they won't have biomass selected, and therefore they will uncloak themselves by passing a corpse. You'll also see in the celestial section stargates, wrecks, and sinusoidal fields. Next section is charges. Charges is bombs. Deployables is MTUs and mobile warp disruptors. Drones is pretty obvious. That's all the different types of drones. And actually, there's one thing to note, I think, within drones. Is it in drones? Actually, I don't see it. Maybe it is not in drones. I was looking for the mission drones. Mission drones, I don't think they actually. I think they may show up in Entity. So mission drones actually don't show up in drones. So a lot of the things when you're first starting your career missions and the things that you run into space at those destinations will be drones, but they're actually a special kind of drone called a mission drone, and they aren't showing up here. I think if in the eUni overview defaults, they will show up if you select the missions preset. Entities is all sorts of different entities. Actually, it looks like entities is where the mission rats are showing up, and it looks like mission drone might be in here too. Is it? Pirate drone is in there. Oh yes, tutorial drone at the very bottom of entity is the ones that show up in career missions. So just that's something that's been a confusion to a lot of new members when they first start playing and they load up the eUni overview. NPCs is Concord, some NPC faction ships, some rats. Orbitals is orbital infrastructure such as customs office. Planetary interaction is capsular and mercenary bases. Ships. And for a lot of our overview presets, we're going to have all of the ships selected. Some of these are not going to be selected. So for instance, in Pod Saver, we don't have all the ships selected. So note that when we look at ships, we have every single one of them selected, which means that it's going to show both our friendly and our enemy ships. Sovereignty structures is self-explanatory. Stations are self-explanatory, and then structures are POS structures and modules. So the tricky part then comes into when we start selecting states. So the types is anything that you have selected in types will show up if the appropriate state is also selected for that type. So you would think that as long as you check it in types, it's going to show up. But the types relates to the states as well. So for instance, if you have if you see a war target and that war target has drones and you have both the player ship and drone selected, then you'll see them both. So you have to have player ship, or you have to have the ship selected and drone selected in types, and then states, you'll make sure that it's got war target selected, and you'll see them both. So if we click on the states tab, there's 3 columns there. The column on the left is always show. The column in the middle is filter out, and the column on the right is show by default. And they actually go in that order. So they actually will override each other in that order. So always show overrides everything else. Do not show overrides show by default, and then show by default is just left there just for anything else. If you don't have show by default selected, it just won't show at all, unless you have obviously always show selected. Now, one thing that's also interesting to note about the state selection is, actually that's the next tab. So, for instance, if you select the travel tab in the eUni default, the only thing that's set to always show is pilot is at war with your corporation, pilot is at war with your militia. So we just always want to see war targets. The other thing that then is we have show by default is literally everything. There's a few things that are set to do not show. For instance, during your travel, in your travel tab, we don't show pilots that have excellent standing. Those are either ones that you've marked yourself or ones that the corporation's marked, or a pilot has good standing. The other things that we don't show is if they're in your alliance, if they're in your corporation, or if they're in your fleet. So those things are all filtered out as do not show. So there's a couple really good examples that have been listed on the website for this. So for instance, if you see a war target and you have pilot is at war with your corporation or alliance selected, you would think that this would give you the war targets showing up on your overview. But if you have a player, if you also have the option player has a bounty on them selected, and you have that set up to do not show, then he won't show up. So you need to select all the attributes that war target could possibly have in order to see the war target. So for instance, that's why on the PvP travel tab and on the PvP tab, literally everything except for friendlies is selected as show by default. Any questions on the tab presets tab, types and states? So if you want to take a look at some of the different setups, if you go over to the Types tab and you click over to Pod Saver on your eUni setup, you'll notice that there's not a lot of stuff selected. The only thing that's selected in there is Celestials and Orbitals. And the only orbital is Orbital Infrastructure, which is your POCOs. And then in Celestials, you've got two things selected. You've got Planet and Sun. And personally, I would remove Sun from that. Just because you don't want to end up at the Sun with a bunch of enemies who also clicked Sun and ended up at the Sun. You want a kind of more random selection from the different planets and celestials and POCOs that are available. So showing up at something that's not the Sun is going to be more beneficial to you. Now, if you did uncheck Sun right there, you'll notice at the top, right underneath Preset and Selected Overview tab, where it says the name of the preset you've got selected. For instance, mine says 5-Pod-Saver-Not Saved. Now, if you want to save your Pod Saver tab without the Sun in it, go ahead and hit the Save button, and it'll pop up a name, a dialog for you to enter the name for that. And what it does is it defaults you to the existing overview name that you had selected, so 5-Pod Saver. If you want, you can add something to it, or you can actually just save it and overwrite your existing tab. So I would save it and overwrite the existing Pod Saver tab. It's going to tell you that you're overwriting it, and then you can click Yes. Now, for instance, something else that you might want to see is if you go to if you have the eUni set up, you can click on the Situational tab, right-click on it, and say Load Preset to Tab, and scroll down to Looting, so that you've got the Looting tab selected. And now in your Overview Setups, under Preset and Selected Overview tab, make sure that it says /looting. And if you look in the types, you'll notice that there's only 2 drones selected. That combat drones, for instance, are not selected. So what you can do for looting here is under the drones section, under types and tab presets, go ahead and check every single drone, or optionally you can right-click on the heading for drone and say select all, and it will check all of the drones. And now up at the top under Preset and Selected Overview tab, it should say /looting-not saved, and you can go ahead and save, but instead of overwriting, change it to 4A looting and drones. And that way what it'll give you is an option after a big fleet battle. If you guys won and you're still on field, you can switch instead of looting to looting and drones, and you can go out and clean up all the enemy's drones too. So let's move along on to any questions on that? Okay, good. Let's move along to the Appearance tab. And the Appearance tab in Overview Settings has 2 different tabs. It has a color tag and a background. And up at the top, there's 3 checkboxes. Apply to ships and drones only. Use small color tags, and then use small font. And the recommendations here are to have the first and the last one checked, but not the middle one. Use small color tags just makes the color tag so tiny that it's really, really difficult to see. So just leave it as normal size color tags. So the color tag on there's two tabs in there, color tag and background. So color tag is the little box that shows up, and that will show up next to the person's name and local. It will also show up on their icon in your overview. And so you can see all of those. So for instance, if you, and these are actually unrelated to your preset. So if you are out in space and you're worried about it at all, you can go ahead and dock now and do /open overview settings. And the rest of the settings that we're going to be looking at are not tab specific or not preset specific. They're actually global. So under color tag, all of those are checked except for, well, if you're in the eUni setup, all of them are checked except for the last two. Pilot has a bounty on them and pilot has no standing. Those ones, not super relevant. Almost everybody has a bounty on them in Eve. It's one of the silliest game mechanics that never actually did anything. So it's not super relevant. And pilot has no standing. Why you would ever want to see a tag on somebody who has no standing, I don't know. So it's an option. You can see everybody out there tagged if you want. But the rest of them are tagged, and that is just make sure that anybody who has some sort of relevant detail that you need to see has a tag. Yes. Yeah, well, you could put on your bifocals and increase the UI size. Don't get me wrong. I was just at the glasses place today, or not today, or last week, and I actually even looked at bifocals. It's scary that it's coming to that, but we're not quite there yet, thank God.
Optometrist?
Optometrist, yeah. Okay, so the color tag is the little icon that shows up. Now, eUni's got a bunch of these selected for you. There's a few things to note about this. This list is going to be putting the icon on the person based on the order things are in this list. So the things at the top override the things at the bottom. You can grab on any one of these rows and drag it up and down. So you can scooch those around and move them around and pick whatever's most important to you. Now, obviously, the ones that are most important for us are pilot is at war with your corporation alliance, and pilot is at war with your militia. Those things are going to be at the top, and they're going to be flashy. And that means that you just always want to see those things first. Now, there's a few others that are super relevant, and those are pilot is criminal or pilot is suspect. Now, while those aren't super relevant in terms of they don't have a war deck on you, so they can't shoot you in high sec, you can shoot them in high sec. So those are ones that are fairly important. Now, the eUni setup has decided to put Fleet and Corporation and Alliance and Excellent Standing above those, just to make sure that you can, if somebody is a criminal or somebody is a suspect, that it's going to show you they're in your fleet first, rather than show you that they're a criminal, so you don't end up AWOXing somebody who's in your own fleet just because they're flashy. That particularly, somebody in your fleet pods somebody else, and now they're a criminal, and now you have to and now you go start shooting them. So fleet comes before criminal and suspect status. Now, somebody who's at war with you within your fleet, that would be really unusual and odd. Could happen, but they're still going to be flashing as at war with you. Now, the icon over on the right, if you click on the drop-down, it lets you pick a color. And I will note that there are some problems here, and that is not all of these. Actually, it's not this tab. It's the next tab. I'll get into it. So you can click a background color for how you want things to show up there. And there's some recommendations that wow, you guys are older than me. That's great. That's really fantastic to hear. You can switch. You can increase the font size and the UI size. You guys know that, right?
Nope. No idea.
If you can share that with us, it'd be great.
I'm not sure.
For us old farts.
Sure. I'm not sure how much you can. I'm not sure if it applies to everywhere, but if you go into the escape menu and you go into general settings, there is the general settings in the escape menu. There's a context menu font size, and it's set to 10. And if you bump that up, it should. I don't know if it increases it everywhere, but it's going to increase it in quite a few places. And then
I have it set to 13. That's almost enough.
Yeah. I did 13 as well, and it barely does it.
Okay, well, not enough, I guess. And I thought there was a way to increase UI size, but I'm not seeing it right now. If I find it, I will mention it, and if not, I'll dig it up and post it in the forum thread for the class.
But in all seriousness, there are people that have problems seeing, like blindness.
Oh yeah.
That do try playing this game, and not because they're old, but because they have a disability.
No kidding.
They have a difficult time seeing.
And seriously, there's so many options in this game that require right-click navigation of menus. And I'm an interaction designer by trade, and that is just disastrous. I end up with carpal tunnel and repetitive stress issues every time I play. So we're in the Appearance tab, and we're editing our color tag. So color tag gives you the option to slide things around and pick your priority. It also lets you pick the background. The icons are set for these. The next option you get is the background for these, and this is going to highlight the entire row of the person in the overview. So the color tag is going to be an icon on the far left column of the overview, and then the background is going to highlight the entire row of the person. And note that there's not a whole lot of things checked in this if you're in the eUni setup. And so the things that we want checked typically are, we want to see if they're at war. We want them highlighted red. If they're at war with your militia, or if they have a limited engagement with you, we want them to show up, and we want them to be blinky. Oh, I didn't talk about blinky yet.
Sorry, one quick question. I'm sorry for my ignorance, but what is a militia? I've heard this referred to several times, and I see it there.
I think it's based on faction warfare. If you're in faction warfare, you're doing something with faction warfare, you're going to be working with militias.
Okay, thank you.
So both color tag and background give you the option to set them as flashy, as blinking. And thanks, St. John. That's great. I didn't see that in there, so I'll have to look that up. Okay, so you could right-click on any row in the appearance color tag or appearance background in overview settings and toggle blink. And toggle blink will either toggle blink for the actual little tag itself, or it'll toggle blink for the entire row color. So the default is we have the row color blinking for at war with your alliance, at war with your militia, and then limited engagement. And then we also have blinking set up for, actually I'm not sure if this is standard, have blinking set up for pilot is a security status below -5, pilot is criminal, and pilot is suspect. And all three of those mean you can shoot them on sight, and you're not going to get tagged by station or gate guns. I will note that, and maybe it's both of these, there is a bug in this UI. And that is, if you go to the right and you hover over the drop-down and you select a different color, it doesn't always show up right away. Sometimes it will not show up at all. Sometimes you'll be lucky and it'll show up right away. Other times it'll just stay as black. So just note that if you've selected something, a color over on the right, and you see the little white line around the color box, even if it doesn't reflect that in the UI, that it is correct and it is going to show up as the one that's selected. And then usually if you log out and log back on, or no, I think it's actually server reset. So once it goes through a server reset at night at whenever they do it in the middle of the night, well, it's the middle of the night for North American time, it will correct itself and it will show up correctly. So the reason that we only have a few of these selected is if you open up your overview and literally everybody's got a color and is blinking and flashing, it's not going to make the blinking and flashing important enough to be obvious. So that's why we really only have the ones that are shootable on site as flashing. And then they're the only ones that have color selected. Checking the X on the left side is what identifies it as it gives it the background color. And then obviously right-clicking and toggling to blink is what makes it flashy. Columns tab is the next tab over. Any questions on the appearance tab? Okay, good. Columns tab is the next tab over. These are the columns that are showing up in the overview. They are These are ones that have been pre-selected by the uni as being most relevant. Two that you might not think are most relevant, but which we have selected in there are radial velocity and angular velocity. Angular velocity Radial velocity is how fast the object's traveling, or if it's traveling toward you or away from you. And then angular velocity is the one that's kind of more relevant, and that is its speed relative to you. So this is going to tell you, for instance, it's going to have an effect on knowing the angular velocity of your enemy will let you know how effective your tracking speed of your turrets is going to be against the enemy. So for instance, if you're flying a larger ship and you're being attacked by a frigate and you're noticing they have a very high angular velocity, and you're going to probably be in trouble and you should call some help. Next tab over is ships. And this is how the option is going to, how things are going to show up when you hover over them.
Excuse me, can we just go back there? Why is it important to have corporation and alliance columns?
I mentioned this earlier. This is basically because sometimes you'll see people, particularly if you're in LowSec or NullSec, particularly, you'll see some corporations are Care Bear corporations. You're not going to have any worry about them. Some corporations are PvP corporations that are going to be more problematic for you. So even if they're not at war deck with you, and this is just using the LSC as an example, there have been a couple instances that I know that Paywin's trying to work on improving the relationship with CFT, Cyusineural Field Theory. But for instance, we know that those guys have big fleets, and if we see one of them in system and we attack him, he's going to drop a Sino, and there's going to be carriers on us. So we're a little more cautious about engaging certain corporations, particularly because we know what they have in the area and we know what they can field and we know how quickly they can get them on top of us. And so it just makes it, just improves our operations to know what we're dealing with or what we're engaging.
If I may add, I fly in NullSec quite a bit. Occasionally your overview will get a glitch and it'll show up either neutral or something else, so you can check your alliance and know who you're flying against.
That's a good call too. So the ships tab, the next one over, is what shows up if you hover over an item in space. And so you can get the option to kind of, show the different things that you want to see. I think there's 4 of them checked in the default, and it lets you just be able to hover over somebody and see at a glance, what they're coming from. There's a little hamburger menu that's underneath the line, right above where it says hide corporate symbol, ticker symbol if pilot is in alliance. You can kind of change the way it looks. There's 3 different options for changing the way that those options will show up. The miscellaneous tab we went to save our existing overview, but know you can also import an overview from there as well. Now, I will say this, one thing that we haven't really talked about yet, but I'll talk about it since we're here. Up in the upper right corner of the whole overview settings dialog is the name of your current overview, and if you click that, you can actually highlight it and change the name of your existing overview. You'll notice right next to that is a share button. Now, if you drag that share button into chat or into any chat with anybody, you can share a link to your current overview setup. But know that when you share that link, it's only going to share your existing tabs with their existing presets. So if you have 10 presets set, it's only going to share the 5 that are selected in the current 5 tabs. Which is why typically when people are asking you to share their overview with them, that you should direct them to the website if they're trying to get the full uni overview, because there's tabs that won't, or there's presets that won't be selected, that won't show up if you try to share it this way. Now, one thing that's nice about the share tab is if you're flying with a fleet and you don't have the exact same thing and they're trying to talk about something, they can quickly share it to you. You can load it into your presets. It won't overwrite things. It'll actually add on to the existing presets you've already got. It will change the way your tabs appear, though. And it will change some of the global things, for instance, in the appearance in the columns. You can obviously reset all your overview settings here. You can have your brackets showing damage indicators, active modules, and so on. Show range. So there's quite a few different options here. And if you import overview settings or export overview settings, it's going to give you an option to click on which file, and these files are saved in your user directory if you're on Windows. And then, for instance, let's go back to the Export Overview Settings button. Go ahead and click on Export Overview Settings, and you get to check all at the top. It's going to show you the same thing for Import Overview Settings, where it's going to show you the current 5 presets, and then underneath that it'll say Other tab presets, and it'll give you an option to show all of the presets that you've got. You can either share those or not. And then the very last tab is History, and this just shows the last 15 overview profiles that you've loaded. And this means either that you've loaded by importing them, or that you've clicked on in a chat window that somebody shared to you, and you can kind of switch back and forth between them by clicking on them directly there. So there were a couple things that I mentioned that I was going to talk about afterward, and one of those is the D-scan and the wormhole preset. So in your D-scan, if you open up your D-scan, you can only open D-scan in space. There's no way to open it in a station. So if you are still in space, when you open up your D-scan, and D-scan is opened by clicking the little button called Scanners right next to the left of your capacitor, and selecting D-scan, which is to the right of that button. There's an option there where you can check to use overview preset. Now, a really great overview preset to have selected on your D-scan at all times is PvP Travel. That just lets you be able to scan and see not only all of the people, any ships that are within D-scan range of you, which is 14.3 AU, but it also lets you see stargates that are in range. Now, one thing that's nice about that is you can see if there's a ship that has the same exact distance as a stargate, you know they're sitting at the stargate. So it's very convenient to get a sense of where people might be hiding. One thing that you're looking for if you do select a different overview preset, for instance, if you select the wormhole preset and then hit a scan, is the wormhole preset's showing you all of the POSs. So, for instance, if you pop into a wormhole and you select overview preset 6 wormhole on your D-scan and you hit scan and you see a bunch of force fields, well, there's a couple different options. One, you may see a bunch of control towers. And that just means that somebody at one time has set up a POS in that wormhole. If you don't see any force fields, then those are all dead sticks. That means that those force fields are no longer powered, and there's probably nobody in that wormhole that's actively maintaining or that is calling that wormhole home. If you do see force fields, that means that there's somebody who knows the way in and out of that wormhole, and they're actually feeding it regularly enough to keep that POS powered. Now, obviously, they may have lost access to it, and the POS may still be powered for a while, but a force field is usually a good indicator that there might be somebody around, that it is somebody's home wormhole, and you should be a little extra careful. And I think that is most of what I wanted to go over. Let me scroll through my notes here. Is there anybody who does not have the problem corporations?
I'm new to the game, so I'm just trying to absorb as much as I can. So I can talk to you offline. But
no, that's fine.
I have no idea what you're even saying.
Well, the problem corporations are usually based on the politics of the game, and the politics of the game are, seriously, I don't know all the politics of all of the campuses. The thing is, all of the campuses are sitting there, and they have relationships with the corporations in their own system and in neighboring systems, and those relationships may be positive or negative. They may have been positive at one point, like CFT used to be positive, have a positive relationship with the uni, but something happened, and now they have a negative relationship with the uni. And I think that Paywin's trying to change that. So our campus leaders are doing some diplomacy, and so it's always best to check in with the other folks in your campus and to know what their relationship is with other corporations. So, for instance, and this is it's actually a really good question. There are quite a few people who have been prior eUni members who come back to the campuses now and then. And then there's other people who may be in a different corporation who just have a really good relationship with eUni. And so, for instance, if you're attacking somebody near the LSC and you might just shout into Mumble. Well, first of all, anybody who's near any campus, you should always be in the Mumble for that campus, and you should always be in the fleet for that campus. Even if you're not doing shit, just pardon my language. If you're not doing anything, just get in the fleet, because at least then you know what's going on, and you have, even if you're just doing some station trading, you can kind of learn a lot about what's happening in the area. But if you're about to shoot somebody, you can say, hey, this guy, so-and-so, I'm about to engage, and everybody might say, dude, he's an 8-year-old character who's a really excellent PvPer who used stimulants. You do not want to engage that person. The other thing, too, is, for instance, there's an ex-Unist, Romnir, who hangs out at LSC quite often, and he will often engage Unistas. Sometimes he flies in fleets with us. Same with Comrade Blade, and so you can shoot them. If you can kill them, great. But just shouting it out in Mumble, hey, I just destroyed Romnir's ship. You'll often get a call back from everybody. Don't pod him. You probably wouldn't be able to pod him anyway, but it's just nice to kind of get a little bit of that intelligence to know what the relationships are of certain people with eUni, and then it can prevent diplomatic incidents. So, for instance, CFT, Sinosaural Field Theory, is a group that has quite large fleets, and they like to hot drop them. And they've been a problem with us for the past few months. They've had a positive relationship with us. Right now, it's not positive. We're trying to make it better. There's another alliance that often operates around LSC, Overload Everything. They will shoot us with impunity, so they're ones to watch out for. You just know that they're gonna be trouble for us. We have a war target right now. The war target actually is there's a couple of them. Deadly Fingertips. Deadly Fingertips is a continuation of the war that we had with Pursuit of Happiness. They're one of the corps that was in Pursuit of Happiness Alliance, and they're a high-sec war. They're a high-sec war group. They declare war just so that they can shoot people without worrying about gate guns and without worrying about Concord in HiSec. And it's a broken game mechanic, and then hopefully it's something that CCP will deal with. There's another war target that we have in LSC. I don't remember their name. Their call sign is IMGAY. I'm not even going to say that. But they're actually, they're causing a lot of problems for folks in Stackmon right now, because a lot of Unistas go down there and they don't think that they're going to be attacked down there, and then there's these war targets, preying on them, and these are often Unistas who aren't in Mumble and aren't in Fleet and are just doing stuff or selling stuff in Stackmon or whatever they're doing down there, and they get tagged. But the good thing about this current war is they've actually been really good to us, and they've brought a really good war to us. They're for the most part not just playing station games. They're not just doing high-sec ganks. They're actually engaging us with fleets. They'll sit their fleet, far enough off the station so that we can engage them. They'll, bring us to complexes so that we can engage them. So it's actually been somewhat fun to have this war with them. Let me see. Is there anything else in overview to go over? Got a couple minutes left. Nope. Oh yeah, a couple minutes. So I will link this.
Question.
Sure.
What it is, the reason I took this class, I'm having a problem with my overview.
Okay.
What I'm trying to do is I'm trying to connect my overview to my D-scan.
Yep.
And all I'm wanting is the ships that are not either in my fleet or even friendly. But I'm still getting my friendly ships, and I can't remove them. I figure out what's wrong.
Okay, so you said you do have the eUni overview, right?
Modified version, yes.
Okay, so when you click on, is there a tab or a preset that you can click on in the overview that doesn't show friendly ships? For instance, the eUni overview, the PvP and the PvP travel tabs and the PvP with drone tabs should not show anyone friendly. They'll only show neutrals and enemies.
Let me change the eUni. Let me see what I got. I've tried. That's what I worked off. Was it?
And actually, I'll put a couple links in here. This is the basic overview guide, and down at the very bottom of that, actually, let me actually put a link to the bottom of it. There's an advanced tips section, and there's a few things down there that might be interesting. There is also the standard. This one also has the download for the standard overview, which is that link right there. There's a link in there that says eUni STD RIA, and that has the one that should have a pretty decent setup of just about everything you need there. And it will have it will have an option that has PvP and PvP travel, and those won't have friendlies in there.
I mean, I keep eUni's RIA on where I can pull it up anytime I need it.
Perfect. So if you've got eUni RIA, then you can go ahead and load that, and make sure that you've got the preset that you want selected. So, for instance, in the DScan, if you select Use Overview Preset, make sure Use Overview Preset is checked, and then scroll down to PvP Travel. And that's the one I'd recommend using. It's a very convenient one for DScan because it shows both Stargates and ships. I use a slightly different one, and actually, by the way, this is really nice. You can set up overview presets particularly to the things you want to do. So, for instance, I have a specific overview preset that I use for scouting. For scouting, there's some additional things that I want to see. I want to see DD sites. I want to see plexes. I want to know exactly, when I do a scan, I want to be able to see exactly where the person is in relation to the other things in space, so I can know, which things they're close to, so I can get my fleet to warp to them quickly.
That's what I'm looking for, because I don't want just fleets. Sometimes down NOSEC we have to track someone down, and that's what I was trying to do. Have one where I just have the ships I need to look for.
Okay, so if you just want ships, you want to make sure that the overview preset you're using is just PvP. So that's number one in the eUni overview. And then PvP travel if you want to see ships and Stargates. And then if you want one that shows a little bit more information, you can set one up that's custom that shows, for instance, I have a scouting one that shows enemy ships and also shows plexes. Plexes, Celestials, and enemy ships.
You answered my question. I see where I make my mistake.
Awesome.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that.
Cheers. Okay, there's another class going on right now? No, okay, I see. I read that wrong. Any other questions? Cool. Great. Cheers, all.
Well, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.